Welcome everybody to this ValuesJam deep dive conversation into the topic of peace. And I'm delighted that we've got Roy and Phil here who have vast experience in this area and are going to introduce the topic, and then we're just going to have a deep dive into it. Now, before we do that, I'm just going to share my screen and share with the group the style in which this is going to work, because there's a particular style that these ValuesJam conversations follow. And so here we go. If I can scroll through my desktop. Here we go. So could I invite us, please, to read from this slide to give us a feel of the ValuesJam vibe. And what I suggest we do is I'll start top left, and then in no particular order, if you could just dive in, working across the way to the right, and then down a line and to the left and across to the right again, and we'll see if we can capture all of them. So we shape our judgments and assumptions with the spirit of being in the same band. We treat people as they would like to be treated.
In a ValuesJam, everybody wins. No one likes a lead guitarist hogging the stage for too long.
You're on mute, Thomas.
Sorry. Tune is that an opinion is an assumption. It is important to see that different opinions that you have are the result of past thought.
The ValuesJam is creative. Have fun, be playful, anything goes, give it a try.
We detach ourselves and others from what is said.
We avoid one-to-one conversations. We are one band.
We share thoughts and opinions in a positive spirit without hostility. Phil.
I know I've just wrote, I cannot see the screen that well on my laptop, so someone else will have to jump in.
I'll speak for you, Phil. It isn't necessary that everybody be convinced to have the same view. We value difference over vanilla, except in ice cream.
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Sure. Be curious for new insights and reflections to help us learn and grow.
We share thoughts and opinions in a positive spirit without hostility. Did we do that one before?
Yeah, we did. So choose a...
Be non-judgmental.
Listen to the rhythm developing.
We could create something new together.
Be relaxed.
Be aware of the subtle fear and pleasure sensations that block our ability to listen freely.
Ask questions to understand. Be non-judgmental.
Each ValuesJammer joins in, flow with the whole meaning of the group and play your part in finding a way for everyone to join in. No one is left out.
We test traditional thinking and perceptions.
Last one, come on.
We spontaneously share those long lost memories or experiences that cross your mind.
Great, thank you very much. So allow that to sink in as much as it will. And now I'd like to hand over to Roy and Phil to give us an introduction to this wonderful topic of peace.
Thanks, Alan. Phil, did you want to jump in and take the lead on this?
No, please go ahead. I'll go
Okay.
after Roy.
So Phil and I, our paths crossed over in this lifetime several times, and in previous lifetimes millions, and we'll do continuously. We have a very shared commitment to understanding the importance of peace and seeing that played out in society at every level. My particular area of peace is peace education, exploring the importance of values, not just stated but lived, the creative process to engage in the dynamic change, and also educational practice. A colleague and friend of a friend of mine I'm working with and has recently set up a company called Positive Peace Cambridge in Cambridge, with some of the peace scholars at Cambridge, to create a social enterprise to explore the three areas of peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building, and how they are developed or not within an educational context. And the matrix that Hilary and myself have created, the values matrix, is an intersection between peacekeeping, peacemaking, peace building, and inner peace, well-being, outer peace or relationship building, community and global peace, which is citizenship, and ecological peace, which is understanding our relationship with the cosmos, and bringing a rigor, both intellectually, but also practically and emotionally. So our key areas of exploration, which I'm keen to discuss with you this evening, is the necessity within peace education for the marriage between the rational and the transrational, the role of the seen and the unseen. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy, and lovely to be here with you all. I won't touch on the idea of positive peace because I'm sure this will come out a lot in discussions, but I think it might be worth us stepping back a little bit to think about the importance of peace and why peace is important in all times, but particularly now. As the United Nations rightly says, there can be no sustainable development without peace. There can be no peace without sustainable development. So we have the world's global goals that the United Nations and member states have agreed to, the 17 of them. One of them is peace. So peace, although it's a standalone goal, can really be seen as a cross-cutting goal, because if we want to make progress on things like education, nutrition, health, climate change, etc., then we have to address issues of peace, and particularly the thing that gets in the way of us making progress on these things, which is violence. Violence once violence gets in the way, then we're not able to make progress on all of these global goals. When thinking about peace, it's also worth thinking about, well, okay, how do we go about moving towards, so Roy spoke about this idea of inner and outer peace in its broadest sense. And I think if we draw on ideas of systems thinking, we now need to think in terms of systems. We're living in an interconnected world. So what does it take to move towards a peace system where peace is pursued by peaceful means? That's a Johann Galton, father of peace studies, terminology. Well, I think part of the idea of moving towards a peace system where peace is pursued by peaceful means is to think about, well, what system do we currently live in? And how can we move from the current system? Well, if you take a look at the evidence, there's lots of evidence to suggest that we're living in a war system. War, and not just war in terms of the bombs that are dropped, the immediacy of war. I'm talking about the institution of war. So this is things that happen before the bombs are dropped, when bombs are dropped, and the remnants of war after. War in itself is the one of the top contributors to the climate crisis. It's the leading cause of the refugee crisis that we have around the world. It's costing the planet. 2 trillion is spent specifically on preparing for war. The cost of violence around the world is about 14 trillion, and it's suggested that about 10 trillion of that can be attributed directly to war. We're now facing two existential threats. One is nuclear weapons, and of course we can see the link there to war. The other one is climate change, and not as many people know the links between war and climate change. The biggest polluter on the planet, the biggest consumer of fossil fuels on the planet is the military, and particularly the US military. So I'm very interested in having a conversation with you all around how might we go about educating, working with, engaging people more effectively to understand the role of war in preventing us from moving towards positive peace. Thank you.
Wow. So thank you both for kind of setting the goalposts there for us to be considering. And to help us get into this, the first question I'd like us to consider is, what does peace mean? What does it sound like, look like, feel like? And then let's see where we go from there.
I think it means feeling safe in an environment, you know, feeling free of fear in an environment.
I see it as harmony, authenticity, being yourself and understanding others, and knowing that we're different. So equal and different. And we accept each other, so it feels good.
To me, it is a question of handling conflicts in a good way, because I think we need conflicts. We need different opinions about different things. So we shouldn't have one opinion, we should have different opinions. And as long as we can respect each other's different opinions, there will be peace. But we shouldn't take away the conflicts, because I think the conflicts are needed in terms of actually exchanging ideas. Thank you.
Mm.
I think that's really true, by the way. I really agree with that. I think you kind of get more peace if you can disagree with each other respectfully and listen to each other, rather than if you're just agreeing with each other in the first place, because you kind of overcome something together and still manage to relate on a human level, even though you've got a difference of opinion. So I think I resonate with what you just said very much.
Same here. I'd like to add, I think peace for me is active engagement in conflict. It's active and willful engagement in conflict, fearlessly, but with respect. One of the challenges that we face, certainly with groups who want to be peace workers, is that they don't like the idea of conflict, and they think peace is everybody getting on with each other and having a big loving. And but when that doesn't happen with any community, and it'd be interesting in your feedback, if you've experienced this in your own, how quickly the peace workers become violent aggressors towards one another. Because no one's acting in a peace, no one is able to articulate their frustration. And therefore, when it spills out, it spills out in a destructive way, because they feel they can't be seen to have a dark side and a frustrating side, and therefore they're not armed with the skills and the techniques to manage that. So yeah, I just wanted to echo that. For me, peace is an active and willful and joyful engagement in conflict.
For me, I share that I love a good quote, and one of my favorite quotes is, "We don't have to agree on anything to be kind to one another." And I posted those signs in the US along my local trail just before the elections. our last elections in both political colors schemes. And so what you're saying here is really resonating in we don't have to agree with everyone, but if we come with respect and we come with open hearts and open minds, we just might actually learn something. We might change our perspective. Someone else's perspective may change, but if we, come at it and listening to understand and not just be hurried and shout like we're doing so much of now, at least particularly here in the US.
Mm.
What's coming through for me here is this dialing down of the I and dialing up the role you play as part of we. Because if you look through that lens, I think you can be more peaceful because you're not fighting for yourself.
I think that's very true. And I think, sometimes I think something and then I don't agree with myself later. So sometimes I have to agree to disagree with myself. And if I can do that, then I certainly can do it with other people. I think it's about like keeping that an open mind, remembering we're all in it together, whatever we define as it.
I think a big challenge to peace is black and white, that we only have two positions in, because word is complicated and many times you meet people who have different opinions of you, and you have to respect that. You have to find that you can't actually have one truth. You have to understand that the word is complicated, and if you divide the word in black and white, that will not lead to peace.
Mm.
And what about the metaphorical part of that question? So it'd be great to hear from you about what you associate peace as looking like, sounding like, feeling like.
Well, I think that going back to to Karen's point, feeling safe, but also what it sounds like to me is dialogue. Peace is people having dialogue, talking. If I have to give it a sound, it ain't the sound of silence, that's for sure. It's robust, and it's also informed dialogue, because, to quote the well-used quote from JFK, is there are too many people who have the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. And one of the things, one of the images, because we draw from wisdom-based cultures, and storytelling is our methodology for engaging in this work. But looking at the yin yang symbol, because I'm an instructor in Tai Chi, so I've got a little Taoist influence. But the idea of you have to have a little bit of yin in your yang, you have to have a bit of yang in your yin. And it's to Thomas's point, if we are not prepared to acknowledge the other persons, if we are seeking to see things in a simplistic way, then there's a conflict. And then going back to Karen's point, we have to deal with the conflict within ourselves. We have to look at our own violent relationship with ourselves first before we can hope to be engaged in peaceful relationship with others. Otherwise, we're just projecting and blaming, and if we can't be at peace, or at least be working on our own dark side and positive relationship with ourselves, we bring very little to the party when we're seeking to be genuine peace work, because we just bring in an opinion or a belief, or worst of all, a strategy.
I'll come in. I've really enjoyed listening to your reflections, and I've been here kind of nodding my head. So in an attempt to respond to like both of the questions, what is peace, and linked to metaphorically, I think evidence shows that peace in a way is still a mystery. We know a lot more about violence. When I tend to think of peace, I've often thought about it in kind of three different ways, that it's both an inner and outer process. So this has been touched on, peace with self, peace with others, peace with the world. it has been broken. I like your point there, Thomas, in terms of the one very much cited article and way of thinking about peace is negative peace and positive peace, which I'm sure Roy will talk about a little bit more. But I'm just curious, is there a way of, you know, a thought experiment going back and thinking beyond that in terms of the binaries and negative positive peace? I'm just very, very curious. So that's another way of, so negative peace would be the sense of the absence of direct violence, where positive peace would be more about the presence of social conditions and the absence of what we call structural and cultural violence, which we might touch on. And then another way of thinking about, you know, what is peace is that it's both a process and a product. It's a means and an ends. Okay, so we have all of the world's governments around the world, all of the world's religions around the world espouse their own versions of peace. So the challenge here is, how do we work towards a peace via peaceful means? You know, Gandhi spoke about there is no road to peace. Peace is the road, or along those kind of lines. So that's you know, some of the things that coming into my head. And in terms of metaphorically, I think of peace in terms of, it's at the end of the day, it's about being embodied. That's my dog, by the way. I'll run and grab the dog. 2 seconds.
Do you know, listening to Phil then, it struck me, or the question that popped into my head was, is peace, in the way that we kind of think of it, a glorified impossibility? And, you know, are we just setting ourselves up for failure?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the hype around the anti-peace movement is to say it is such an idealistic desire, it is not even worth the effort. And that in itself is a consequence of manipulation. And it's what we mean by peace. And there are 2 points I want to make. The Johan Galtung has been referred to earlier, Phil mentioned, so maybe he in his work on violence, peace and peace research, he defines violence. I think that might be worth just exploring at the moment, because I've been working with schools this week, and the term violence in an organization that wants always to be peaceful is actually greeted very badly, because we have to agree what violence is. And so to use Galtung's definition, violence is present when human beings are being influenced, so that their actual somatic and mental realizations are below their potential realizations. So being in an environment where they're not allowed to grow intellectually, emotionally, practically. And the idea of schools or other institutions, but I'll speak on schools because that's my passion, is we having to define what we mean by violence within an educational setting, where a lot of people work so hard for peace. But the 3 kinds of violence is, you know, there's a direct violence, which is verbal or physical, which, you know, but then there's the institutional violence, and then there's the cultural violence. And in many communities that are so locked into their belief system that they are doing good stuff, they are blind to the systems which they have created that are creating violence, as defined by Galtung, that are suppressing the potential intellectual, emotional, material, and spiritual needs of those in which they are ironically seeking to serve or seeking to protect. So I just wanted to sort of add that to the mix. So when we talk about violence, the definition of violence is really important. It's not just getting a gun. It's actually not making somebody a cup of tea when you've made everybody else in the staff room a cup of tea. You know, that's an act of violence.
And I think violence is anything that hurts another person.
Yeah.
So it could be a word. So I'm dealing with some Central African nations, where the cultures are culturally violent, but there's violence in the boardroom. Anywhere in the world where somebody is caustic or critical or downright ignorant of somebody else's pain. So maybe honesty is something we should explore. How can we be honest about a hurt that's coming to us, which to the other person doesn't seem like a hurt? So it's not come with a knife or a gun, but it's come with a word or an ignorance, or that's, I think, is important. And when I talk about harmony, I don't mean that everybody is the same. So I recognize that everybody is different. That's the main part of what I work with is, and I understand what you mean, Alan, but I think we can't ignore the egoless I in the we, because we are both.
Good point.
Yeah, I think it's all, gosh, I'm thinking of so many things from everything everyone's saying. It's so interesting. Thank you. You know, because I'm in a boardroom of mainly men at a football club. And I would say from that definition that you just mentioned, Pauline, that a lot of violence happens. But if I was to like name that violence and say how I felt inside every time it happens, I don't think we'd get very far in terms of like the actual functioning of what we need to do. So I have to deal with that myself and find good ways to deal with it, and think that, you know, I actually like them all. I just don't agree with a lot of the things that they say. So like just thinking that that's okay and finding that peace within myself about that, you know, and kind of, it's funny because like I was talking to a fellow board member about that, and I just realized that this is being recorded. So I'm not sure how much further I should go with this example. In fact, I was just going to say he compared sometimes it to domestic violence, you know, like sometimes the way that things are, but I didn't see it like that. So it's an interesting, you know, it's a very, because I have a mission in my mind, and I think it's much more important that we achieve, you know, what we're trying to achieve than work out, you know, what everyone's problems are. Sometimes we have to, but that's what I think.
I think these, you know, the ideas of violence, peace, conflict, power, they're all useful tools, right? And tools can be, if they're useful, use them as making sense of, you know, the things that we see in our life. And if they don't work, then don't use them, you know. But I think that, you know, Roy's definition, and I think of another definition that I've seen which I think is useful, I find useful. Violence is avoidable insults to human dignity and basic human needs. I think that's another useful way of thinking about violence. And thank you for sharing, you know, what you shared, Karen. I think it raises the challenge of, you know, to what extent can we use our power to try and influence things? And I think at the end of the day, we can really never control things that happen outside, can we? Whether we should even try to, right? We could try and influence. But I think one of the things, the starting place for peace would be to try and turn them inwards a little bit more. But that then raises a challenge, because if you think of schools, universities, research, etc., we're often trained to think of, let's analyze things out there and do the diagnosis, with not much training around how do we look at ourselves, unless you're a therapist, which is what my background is, right? We're not really encouraged to do that. So I think that's one of the challenges that I think we could do a lot more, much more could be done to look at the real personal dimensions as well of peace work.
It's really interesting because I was having this discussion with a football player who is also a human rights lawyer, and he was saying that, you know, he has this conflict when he goes into the changing room. If someone else is injured that plays in his position, he hopes they won't get on the bench because he will get to play. But he hopes they'll be on the bench because he'll get to play. But at the same time, he does care about them and hopes that they'll get better. So like, he finds it really hard. Like, you know, should I hope that they'll get better, or should I hope that they won't so that I get to start, right? And, you know, and he finds this a big conflict. And I said, well, I think you've got to, you know, just distinguish between what's personal to you and what's functional for the football game. You can't be processing all over the pitch. you know. Although, you know, it's wonderful that we think these things, and because we're all people, we're all human beings at the end of the day, but we kind of can put a boundary on things and, you know, put them in there when we have the time and space to do it, you know, kind of thing.
Which, just on that, if I could just come in, because it makes me think of this, you know, the creative tension between process and ends, right? So is the challenge there doing the right thing to get the right result, or working with the right process and being open to what the result would be? I'm just curious.
Isla, have you got any thoughts to share at this stage?
I'm just reflecting very deeply and digesting. It's a fascinating conversation. I've just been reflecting really on a question of why do we not value peace and everything that we're talking about? We often take peace for granted until we start to suffer violence, war, other things. And so why is it, I know already Roy had touched, you know, on some of this element of why it's not valued in terms of where the focus is and the attention is on war. So a key question for me, I just keep thinking and reflecting on is why is it not valued? The inner work that helps us to align and to step into the world in a way that we can find our inner alignment and in a way that best serves the world. And I just wonder as well if there's an element too of trying to reframe as well. So I've just been reflecting deeply as everyone's talking. Thank you.
Can I just add to that, Isla? Because I think the whole thing around why don't we value peace, I think part of our challenge is understanding that because of our own nature, nurture, culture, education, one person's peace is another person's irritant. And the idea of being able to have some kind of understanding of what our shared peace is. And it's come the Venn diagram of the I thou, you know, Buber. Where are we in this? And having the space, and again, I know this is the work that you do, Pauline, in terms of, can we just come to that point of our central, what are we all here for? Not what are you here for, not what this group, and how do we define that? And I think one of the challenges is understanding that sometimes, and again, to Karen's point, which I thought was very, very helpful, is in the various peace models, and again, Phil may be able to sort of expand this further if he wishes. We know that the wisdom-based, the wise peace builder has to be both collaborative. They need to know when to collaborate. They need to know when to accommodate. They also need to know when to avoid the conflict. And they need to know when they need to be competitive, you know, and fight for that justice. And the archetypes that we use, because everyone needs a framework of wisdom-based peace work, is the peacemaker is the collaborator, and the facilitator is the accommodator, and the peacekeeper knows when to avoid it, and the warrior is the competitive one. But when values come into this is a very interesting. You think, oh, that's lovely, because the peace builder has got these 4 different archetypes, and so long as they're working within that parameters. However, when I go back to my earlier point, which is my personal bugbear, is the blindness of the good people doing bad things. The idea of, I am a nice person doing in this, and I'm doing nice stuff, so therefore I can do it blindly, and they become excessive. So our values can be creative, or they can be excessive or destructive. It doesn't matter, whatever value, peace, love, friendship. But when a peacemaker, the collaborator, becomes excessive in terms of their commitment for peace, they become the savior. They set themselves up as, there's only me that can do this. And we all know what happens to saviors. Tend to get crucified. The facilitator that becomes excessive in their values or destructive becomes the servant. And we may, and I can only speak for myself, we've all found ourselves facilitating and accommodating so many people's needs, we lose ourselves. So we become the servant or the slave. The peacekeeper, it's making sure, you know, people avoid the conflicts, and there is a role for that. When they become excessive, they avoid all conflict and they become a sleeper or a statue. And then finally, the warrior who is fighting for peace, which is a little bit of an oxymoron, the fighting for peace warrior, because they see the importance of being competitive and challenging, as you know, as Phil said, you know, the ridiculous trillions and trillions of pounds spent. That is worth looking at the competitive argument for a peaceful world. They can become the dictator, and the warrior can suddenly become a dictator for peace. And all of the good work to be competitive and collaborative and accommodating and avoiding in a balanced harmony, a wise way, can be lost when we fall short of the own expectations because we become excessive and destructive in our values and not wise.
I think this brings us back to the question Phil asked quite close to the beginning about the system that we're in now, and how do we get to a system that would be better. And it reminds me of a conversation I had a few weeks ago about what's happening in Ukraine. And I found myself comparing it to a playground. And I was saying, you know, if stuff starts happening in a playground, then eventually it gets to the stage where somebody says that's enough, we're not going to have this anymore, and the playground rules are put into place, and nobody is willing for it to continue. So I don't know why I've thrown that in, but Phil, would you like to ask your question again about the systems and see where we go with that?
So okay, so in order to do that, I can draw on Margaret Mead, right? So Margaret Mead spoke about in order to bring about changes, you know, so let's think of slavery and things like this, you know, we need two things. One is to understand the current situation, the current system that we're in, okay? So we know the downsides of war. We know, you know, the economic, the human, the ethical, the environmental downsides of war. The other component that Margaret Mead spoke about is that we need to replace the current system with something better. So this is the question: how do we replace the current war system with a peace system, and what might that look like? And that's a lot what we do in, you know, the work that I do with World Beyond War. We lay out a blueprint, knowing that it's always work in progress and knowing that it's one perspective, but how do we move from the current war system that we have towards a peace system where peace is pursued by peaceful means? And I can happily talk about what that consists of, but that's the question. How do we move from the current system that we have to a peace system pursued by peaceful means?
I'm going to not say anything because I've spoken too much tonight, but if no one else does, I'll be in there. So you better start speaking, because that's such a brilliant question.
And how do we do that without any playground rules?
Ooh, I'm biting my hand here.
I have an idea. It's we haven't talked about it, but you know about the non-violent communication system. Yeah. And I know Marshall Rosenberg, he went to Northern Ireland and talked and made a dialogue, as Roy was talking about, between the different people there. Then he went down to Palestine and made the Israeli people talk to the other part of the, and that's the nonviolent communication system, as you know it. It's about why are the other part so aggressive? And you have to understand the aggressiveness in terms of being in pain. and you have to understand and really feel in why the other person is in pain, and talk to the pain and not talk to the aggressiveness. So to me, nonviolent communication is a small part, but an interesting part to go into the process of meeting aggressiveness and violence.
Absolutely.
I'd like to say something. I create magical conversations, and the rules are no judgment, no anger, and no coercion in the time of conversation. And to give you an example, a friend of mine in South Africa, black female, she ran a session in the workplace with men and women in the room, about 90 of them, but they had a panel, and she led the conversation with the issue of non-judgmental, about how men listen to women and women listen to men. It was a remarkable success, and one of the senior men said, "Oh my God, this is a good way of doing things rather than creating policy." And the people didn't want to leave the room. So after 90 minutes, they said the session's closed, and people were saying, "Oh, but we want to carry on." So it is possible to change in a situation that was a very male-dominated African situation. It was a corporate situation, but because she set the ground rules, it changed the energy of how they heard the information. I'm very proud of her.
How do you create the appetite for it in the first place, Pauline? Because I'm thinking about Karen's boardroom and somebody suggesting that sort of reception it might get.
Well, this was men and women in the room equally, and very senior people. So it is possible, Karen.
Sure, but what I'm asking is, how did you get agreement and the appetite for it to happen in the first place, not what happened at the event?
She, in that situation, she just set the invitation out to come along in an open-minded fashion. So when I run these, I say, you know, you come without judgment, with an open mind, no judgment. You come with your experience only, and you're not allowed to be angry or try and force a result. If anybody does, they're very calmly invited to review the rules and either stay or go. And in that environment, people usually stay.
I was reflecting, I think someone was sharing earlier that there's already a set of tools like nonviolent communication, and there's a range of tools to support conflict prevention. And there's a range of, you know, frameworks and processes that have been shown to work, you know, often using something like John Paul Lederach's model, but looking at the personal and the relational, you know, the organizational, structural, and ultimately the cultural. And within a system, all of this informs each other. And at the heart of that is people. And so reflecting, and a constant question is, why is peace building always left to the peace builders? Why are peace builders such a minority? And why is this not something that every single person feels is something they can be a part of? And often the word peace is not resonating, because for all the reasons I shared earlier, there's been campaigns, it has a certain image around it. People also take it for granted until it's threatened or in their own personal interests. And within the system, there's a lot of power and money fueling the war machine. And it's a question of, and there's also a lot of, let's say, blind spots and ignorance in the system as well. You know, the impact everyone has on their immediate surroundings, but globally, we're so interconnected. And so I'm just curious, you know, how can we find ways to create incentives and to speak languages that really resonate with people? You know, how do we at the personal level find ways to support education system, to support these tools to be really understood and valued, to bring it into the boardrooms, into companies, you know, to look at ways businesses can apply some of these and change the dynamics, and organizations. And, you know, it's how can we find people who who feel and see that bigger picture and create those connections, because it feels like within the system, there's always going to be a resilience of one system, and how can we really support and empower, you know, the system that supports that journey towards peace.
So what we're doing at my football club is being the first club in the world to value women and men the same. So paying the women footballers the same as the men. And so we're on a journey, okay? Not everyone's at the same level. And if you see that in terms of peace building, which I hadn't done until just now, but if we see it in that way, I think there are just about enough people involved, like over 50% of the people involved in this, who see it at a very human level about change and culture change. And then there are probably just under 50% who see it as being about football, right? So as long as there are more people in a given situation where you're trying to create peace, who kind of want peace as a big mission, as their kind of main goal, and are willing to, as someone said earlier, you know, be very we over me about it, you know, but you can have all the sort of egos who are really about football or whatever it is they're about in another situation. I'm just using football as a kind of little microcosm here. As long as you've got less of those and more of the others, I think you're okay. But it is about, you know, making a movement. So getting more of those people with the same mindset, who believe in the bigger picture, for want of a better expression, and then them carrying the people who just like football with them.
It's Lewis Football Club, isn't it?
It's Lewis Football Club. Yes, it is, yeah. Roy.
I just putting it out there for those that don't know. Which one of the things that is extraordinary in terms of that as an example is the bravery to do the thing that needs to be done. And one of the characteristics is to be the person or be the group that do things that everyone knows could be done or should be done. And to go to Isla's point, is that we have systems. Now, if I can give a short example, the city of Leeds, we know, if you look at through the lens of history and psychology and sociology, we've got models of systems that grow. We can tell you how they grow, from simple to complicated to chaotic and self-organizing. We know what the models are, and we've seen this pattern over centuries of getting to a point, even in civilizations. And Major John Gloob, who was the major in charge of the overseeing Jordanian army, was a historian, and in his fantastic paper on about the collapse of empires, he quotes someone, says that the only thing we learn from history is that no one learns from history. And we have systems, and what the city of Leeds, and this is an extraordinary act of cross-party agreement. They agreed what their Venn diagram was, and myself and various other people were involved in the project. And they, at its simplest, what are we here for? And they said, we are here for the happiness of the children and family of Leeds. And I went, okay, can we make all of our decisions, financial decisions, and political decisions, cross-party, to support the city of Leeds? So they did, and they used restorative practices, very important. And one of the schools, Carr Manor School, go have a look at this. They introduced, it's a secondary school, 62 languages spoken, and they introduced the idea of restorative practice, but bringing in peace talks 3 times a week. So the leads, the head, all the senior leadership team will get into the school, and they still do it now. It's been going on for some years. They will arrive, and 7:45, they will do circle time, and they will check in the social and emotional aspects of everybody in the leadership team. And by the way, you know, what are we doing this week? And then all of the staff will come into the hall, and they will sit in their circles, and they will check in what they're doing, but also how are they feeling. And then all of the children in family groups of 2 year 7s, 2 year 8s, 9s, 10s, and adult. Now, the adult isn't always a teacher, and they do the same simple facilitation of, how are you feeling? This is what we're doing this week. So this is called the check-in. And they have every adult, and I'm talking cleaners, I'm talking office staff, and this is such an amazing community. But they check in on a Monday, they check up on a Wednesday, they check out on a Friday, and they're all taught restorative practices. So the children manage the behavior of the children, and if a child's behavior is unacceptable to that class for whatever reason, even if they're asked to step outside, if they asked to step outside the class, there is a dedicated peace worker within that class, from key stage 2 all the way up, that will go and say, so what happened there when I feel, because, and they go through the restorative process. In 7 years, across the primary schools and the secondary school within this community, they've lost 7 days in exclusion in 7 years, because they've implemented a process of peace, and they have been consistent. And this is not that this can't work, it's just that some people want it to work somewhere else, and all they want to do is say, oh, you've done it, can we take it? But it's not like that. It's dirty, it's messy, and it's sometimes violent. And to finish off this point, and Phil's point about Margaret Mead, and the point about the power of a small group, and she says, and never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think what we should be looking for now is examples of people that have done it and seeking to share that. Because the system that we see is we've got children and young people who are more evolved in terms of their understanding of conflict and peace, because their existential challenge has moved them to a point of being more globally aware, to Phil's point about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the next level, which is a 9th level of growth, is the role of the warrior or the peace worker. If you look at the wisdom traditions, it's called the bodhisattva. So we're at the first time in history, because of technology, because of the existential threat, the real peace workers in our society are our children and young people. The elders are failing the peace workers of today, because for the first time in history, the elders have become a little bit useless.
Is it okay if I jump in? I want to come back on some of the things that have been brought up, because I thought they were brilliant. The question around why don't we value peace, I think, is a really good one. So so thank you for bringing it up. And I think part of the reason is, I mean, if we I'll think from personal experience, oh, hippie, it's that hippie stuff that hippies do, the kind of peace building work, And one of the things that I try and do in the work that I do alongside communities here when doing trainings and things like this is try to talk to them about, the role of peace building, and do it in such a way that, for example, I'm thinking of one of the sessions we've done, we'll share a PowerPoint or something, and we'll show pictures of kind of architects, builders, officers, etc., and we'll ask, what do all these people have in common? And they'll say, oh, teamwork, collaboration and things like this. And I think that's right, but it's also, and I do this in the context of peace literacy, if we want to be, for example, a basketball player, a football player, what do? We have a passion, but we work hard at it. We study, we dedicate ourselves to this. And I think a little bit of in the peace building world is that I'm not saying that everybody needs to go out there and get a degree, a master's, a PhD in peace and conflict studies. I'm not saying that. What I'm trying to suggest is that if we want to be, and I love the idea, Roy, of wisdom, I think that's brilliant. If we want to be kind of wise peace workers, then we have to dedicate ourselves to it and learn doing and really practice it. So that's part of the thing that I was thinking in terms of why don't we value peace building, because maybe people think, well, I'm doing that anyway, and they might be, but I really like what you say as well, Roy, around good people doing bad things. You know, they might think they're doing brilliant work, but unless they have the ability to turn the mirror inwards and look at themselves, they might be doing a lot more doing harm than actually doing good. So there's one of the things. And Karen, I love the point, which was right at the beginning, is you know, your understanding of peace is that about being safe, you know, and secure. And I think that's something that all of us can relate to. So when in with my World Beyond War hat on, and people ask me, well, okay, Phil, you're against the war system. Where do we start with that? You know, where do we start? Well, one of the places of starting is what makes us secure. And everybody can relate to that. And I don't think we'll be as secure as what we could be when we have this war system over us. Oh, you know, this leader's coming, let's invest more in nuclear weapons, etc. So we have this saying, and we lay it out in our book, that no one is safe until all of us are safe. And that really underlines the importance of a systems approach, the interconnectedness of the world that we're living in. And we've spoke quite a lot here about you know, peace with self, peace with others. And I think I'll leave this, I'll end with a question on this one. I'm very much in favor of that. I think it's necessary. It's necessary because we need to have peace with ourselves, peace with others. I think that it's perhaps necessary, but not sufficient, in the sense that the larger picture in which we operate in is not always brought into focus as much. It's nice to be good with each other, and as people speak about in the peace building field, you know, be nice and friendly and things like this. But we really need to pay attention to the systems, you know, to the broader systems. And I don't think the larger picture in which we operate in is brought in as much. So the question is, to put this back out there, how do we do this great work around non-violent communication and things like this, but do so in a way that challenges, you know, some of the broader systems? And so non-violent communication is one approach. The utility of non-violence is proven as well, and I could talk about that, but I won't. So I'm just curious, how do we move from non-violent communication, which I love, to working with people to look at the broader system in which we operate in?
Great question.
Just reflecting, Phil, as you were sharing, also peace for who? Because many people in the world right now have peace. You know, I'm lucky to be sitting here in peace, but at the expense of who? Other parts of the world, because of the system, have very violent conflict at the moment. So peace for who, and how can we leverage and find ways into that system to really challenge in a positive way as well? A question is, how can we show examples? How can we, you know, show examples, for example, where businesses have, you know, been able to contribute positively in a country or shift dynamics, from government perspective too, and then of course with people. So how can we really, you know, find ways to show the benefits? We take peace for granted, but what are the other benefits as well? If we're not personally in war ourselves, and we're lucky enough not to be, what are the incentives? What, you know, how can we show it from a financial perspective around profit? You know, what are the incentives that support that? What are the incentives to well-being? How can we show this in ways that will speak to people, so that, as I think it was Karen was saying earlier, how do we support that sort of growth and that movement as well? And to speak to Margaret Mead.
I think, you know, a lot of people see this stuff, like you were saying, someone was saying earlier, like a bit hippie-ish, or like don't value it. And I think the thing is that they see it as like a tick box, something you should be doing, you know, like a virtue thing. But actually it's good for business, and it's good economically, and it makes sense in terms of people's well-being. So, and that has an economic price, you know, people's well-being. You can put pound signs or dollar signs or euros on that. So I think sometimes, you know, the answer is to demonstrate the kind of economic value of peace, and to let people know on an individual level how much their lives would improve were they to have peace, and were they to think about it a bit more. And I think to campaign is very important, because you were saying, Phil, you know, what do you do next? I think you need to become peace activists. But peace is going back to the beginning, you know, because like when I think about myself, I think about having a bit of peace. I think about a cup of tea and a magazine. You see, I don't think about you know, doing stuff that creates peace. I see that I do, you know, in my work, but I think there's a job to be done in changing perceptions around what peace is within and without. So there's quite a lot of work to do, isn't there, really, about peace when you think about it and when you talk about it. But yeah, I very much think that it's about campaigning so that you can violently dent the systems, and B, show people within the existing systems how much better they would be were they to pay some attention to the success stories that there are. Roy was talking about one. I've got one. You know, that there are clearly stories, but the systems are so antiquated and conservative at core that they can see it, but they don't yet change. So we need to keep proving concept all the time with these kind of stories, keep like elevating the platforms that we've got, and then proving concept there, so that you're influencing, and at the same time keep banging on the existing systems and demonstrating how wrong they are and why they're wrong. And the other thing, sorry, but twice I think you've come down to what's the purpose of this? You know, why are we doing anything really? Why are we here really? And that's the other thing, people need to be reminded of, why we're all human beings, you know. Why are we here is the other thing, purpose, because that goes clearly into dismantling existing systems and demonstrating new ones that would be good to use instead.
Just picking up on one.
Phil and Roy, are you aware of any work that's been done? I'm thinking of listening to Isla and also what Cameron's been saying. I think it was Deloitte did a piece of work on putting an economic value to the benefit of well-being in organizations. And that was the launch pad for the well-being industry, if you like, because they had a business case. So is there anything like that in peace?
Yes, so I can answer that one. So the Institute for Economics and Peace, the world's leading think tank for the measurement of peace and the economic cost of violence, do a lot of work looking at this issue in terms of, you know, peace is not just good for people or the planet, it's good for business as well. And so I would suggest going and taking a look at that great work. We did some work here recently in Bolivia, actually, with the Chamber of Commerce. And the title of the talk was something around the role of peace in peace and the private sector. And there was a lot of interest from the Chamber of Commerce. That video has been seen 19,000 times, you know, from the presentation that we give, you know, so there is a lot of work on that. So I don't know if Roy or others know others, but I wanted to come back on two of the things that were said there. I love the point of telling different stories. I think we need to tell different stories around the great peace work that's done. How often do we hear about celebrating the heroes of war? You know, so we actually have World Beyond War something called a Peace Almanac, which is a book which lays out 365 days a year. Did you know in 1948, on this day, this movement was done for peace, as a way of countering the over focus on telling, you know, war, etc. Let's face it, we're good at peace, because if we wouldn't be here on the planet. You know, we're good at peace. So we just need to keep telling that story as well, about how good we are at getting along and you know, working towards peace and things like this. The other point was the question around whose peace, or you know, yeah, whose peace are we talking about, which I think is a really good question. And in doing that, though, I know that you said that, you know, I'm peaceful here and I'm sitting here, I'm not at war. An argument could be made that we're all implicated in the war system. in the sense that, you know, when so much is invested in terms of preparing for war, it means that that money that's gone towards the military is directed away from more productive activities such as education, health, etc. And I still remember sometimes when I was living in the US and doing some trainings, you know, around peace building and things like this, and many of the young people come up to me and it's, you know, Phil, we don't really need to talk about war that much because we're not involved in war at all. Okay, this is a real opportunity for education here. Of course, they're involved in war, as in, you know, the country is involved in war. So I think part of the, you know, looking at the system of whose peace is to remember that when I'm talking about war and the war system, I'm not talking about things that happen out there in faraway countries where the bombs are dropped. I'm talking about the preparation of war, which often takes place in global north countries, particularly the US and particularly the UK, and how that's transported. Where do you think a lot of the global south countries get their weapons from?
Yeah,
we sell them to them.
I would like to put in something, another aspect, and it's about, you could say there is a war between criminals and other persons who are victims. And I understand that in Virginia, in United States, in their prison system, there was this guy who has for 10 years introduced dialogues between the prisoners and the guards and social workers. And what happened is that actually it's been very successful. When I say dialogues, it's not just, it's dialogue through the whole system at every level down to the prisoners. And what happened is that actually they have got very good figures so that actually the prisoners don't come back after that. It's one of the most successful stories of the prison system in the world, I think. And if you need a name, you could say Peter Garrett, who is working in England. He has worked with this system of dialogues in the prisons and been very successful. And I'm trying myself to get this system into the Swedish prison system, but they haven't yet said yes to it. But I think that's a system where actually, as Roy pointed out earlier, dialogues, which means that people understand each other much more, understand their feelings and the purposes. So that's an example. Virginia prison system, very good way of actually making peace between, because these prisoners, of course, when they have to take the responsibility, but it's a question when they get out, if they are in war with the society or not.
It may be the same system and or the same group, but have a look at the actors gang in the States, because they do, my background is theatre for peace, so we use theatre and the arts, and they have introduced the idea of creative practices and taking on different characters and play, and they have 100% success rate of non-reoffending, because they take people through to Phil's point, the story. And the thing that connects us all is the story. We all tell the same story. Every culture tells the same story of the hero. You look at Joseph Campbell and his fantastic book, you know, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And our point of contact for us in our peace work is storytelling. Just that, what is the story? What is our story? And whether or not we talk about purpose, understand, plan, act, evaluate, or we say the call to adventure, accepting the call, crossing the threshold and the paths of trials. It's the language, the shared narrative that immediately people can connect with. And interestingly enough, Sabra Williams is a friend of mine who's been involved in the Actors Gang, and her sister, they're both amazing women. You asked about, is there any organizations out there doing, you know, the business plan for peace? Well, there is an organization called the Business Plan for Peace, and that I'll send you the link, and Tiona, the other peace worker, so they're amazing sisters who's been part of that. And one final point, in terms of the power of story and the power of narrative, it comes right back to a simple framework that we connect with, and we can then use it to say, so what is the story here? What is your story within relationship to this story? And what is the narrative that we now need to shape, to rewrite for us? And I think it's about giving people the language, but also, Karen, to your point about the why don't more people, more people get involved in peace, is because we've been educated it's the role of the politicians or the peace workers or the peace scholars. And the disenfranchisement of people from active participant in peace working goes right back to Voltaire, who said, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And if you educate people to these people are going to kill you in your sleep, and that person, then we have to say, well, what's the story here? And is it a story worth believing? And is it a story worth telling? And whether or not we're talking Carl Manor or the Business Plan for Peace or the fantastic work in Virginia, it's people saying, I'm going to change the narrative. And what we provide, Phil does with myself and others, is a structure for that simple narrative based upon our shared humanism, which goes right back to the thing that connects us all. It's not just stories, it's our spiritual, emotional, material, and intellectual needs. That's what makes us human. Whether or not you look at through psychology or neurology or systems thinking, as human beings, we all want to tell a story. And if we can get to the compassionate state of listening to other people's, then we really have a story to tell.
Yeah. And Roy, about 5 minutes ago, you said, and the final point is, and
yeah,
so,
what can I say?
So we will take that as the final point. There is one last part of this session, and this is because how many times do we have a conversation which might have felt like a good experience at the time, but the next morning you wake up and you think, well, what happened as a result of the conversation? So could I please invite you to just personally reflect for 60 seconds or so. And as we approach World Peace Day on the 21st, please think of one small action that you're encouraged to take as a result of what you've heard, what you've said, and what you've thought of today. And then when we've got those, we'll just share them before we say goodbye. So who'd like to kick us off? Actually, sorry, Karen, that should be to you, shouldn't it?
Oh, all right then. I just thought that I would, because I wasn't thinking about celebrating World Peace Day, but I can suggest that we celebrate World Peace Day at the football club, and that each of our players comes up with an action that they will take to build peace. Obviously I'll give them some ideas, in terms of what peace is or isn't, based on this conversation, and then maybe they can all come up with an action on their social medias, because they're some of them quite active on Twitter or Instagram, with an action that they want to take, because they're the ones with they're the role models, you know, to not to celebrate world peace, but to make it, you know, to make it, because we do understand, we do say we want to change the world. Our hashtag is fans of change, you know. So what are we individually doing? What action are we taking in World Peace Day? Because, like, you know, this is really making me think peace. I always sort of think about not taking action for peace. I always think about, oh, peace is all relaxing. You don't have to do anything, just sit in a chair. But actually, I think we can think about how peace is active, and you know, what action are we all taking? So that's what I think I'll do. I'll suggest that.
Thank you. Who's next?
Well, my idea is to go into schools. I have had the idea before, and I really think that going into schools and actually work with as we were talking about, dialogues and respect and such things. I think it's very, if you want to change systems, you have to start very early, and I think what I could do, and I've been doing something of that, is actually going into schools and talk to very young ones and talk with them and about respect and peace and so on. So that's a situation I would really like, and I'm also been taking impression of this discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And are you able to give us an idea of what your first small step towards that might be? Is there a specific school that you have in mind, or a specific conversation?
Yeah, I went to a school in Stockholm last year, and I asked the young ones about what happened during the Corona crisis, and what were their feelings about that. And the big feeling, what they were separated from the old ones, the grandfathers and grandmothers, so on, and they were very outspoken, and they were very much interested in getting in discussion. So I have a specific school that I would like to continue to work with. Yes.
Fantastic.
So to share, we've been talking a lot today. The one thing that keeps coming back for me is that everyone can take action, and that everyone is complicit in contributing, you know, to violence and war in many different ways. And also that everyone can contribute to peaceful society. And we were talking a lot about what makes a peaceful society. I think at the beginning, a number of people were saying it's about safety, it's about growing, it's about potential. Roy also mentioned the business plan for peace and the mighty heart. And what the mighty heart often talks about is what breaks our heart. And often what breaks our heart is also where we can be in service to the world. So how do we marry what breaks our heart, and to find through our own inner journey ways to be in service? And that can be, you know, in our families, in our communities, in our businesses, and in different ways. So I think the key takeaway for me is it all starts with ourselves.
Thanks, Isla.
I'd like to add to that. The thing I've got from this is, I mean, my everyday job is doing this, but the thing that I sometimes forget is the people at home who are supporting me and needing me to be a great peace worker, you know, globally. But I should go in, you know, not that I'm a terrible parent or husband, at least I think I'm not. Let's good job my wife's not on this call. But the idea of doing yet more for others, but also taking space for me. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, there is a saying, we teach that we most need to learn. The reason I'm involved in change and peace is because I'm terrible at changing, and I'm constantly in a state of conflict. So yeah, I'm keen to just take this time to reflect. I've really enjoyed this dialogue, but I'm just going to give a bit of space and time to me, take a pause, and see the one thing I can do just to to deal with my own conflict, so I can be better able to deal with the bigger conflicts that we're all connected, interconnected with, and actually all interdependent with as well. So thank you.
Right.
Okay, so I think I've been thinking a lot, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really have, and you know, thank you to you all. And I just wanted to say, Alan, the way in which you created the environment really sets up, you know, the process. So the way in which you started by talking about, you know, this is a space in which dialogue, and we don't know where it's going. I think it's such a really helpful way of looking at things, and it's quite often in contrast to how education is told it should be predictable, it should be outcome driven. So that focus on the process. But of course, all of us here, you know, have played a role in kind of facilitating that process. So I want to say that thank you to you all for that. One of the things that I'm going away with, and one of the things I've really appreciated, is in my daily life, I'm 100% on the go all of the time. It's action, 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 action. And actually being here in this space has made me think that we know that in order to bring about or promote social change, both reflection and action is needed. And I'm too far over one way, you know, towards the action part. So I've really liked this reflection. And it made me think of Kenneth Boulding, and we wrote about this in our book, actually. Kenneth Boulding, who's one of the kind of founders of the peace studies field, he speaks about how activists are always, you know, don't stand there, do something. And he said, actually, I turn it around. Don't do something, stand there and stop and reflect. So in line with kind of what Roy was saying, I'm going to go away and I'm going to really think about some of the things that were brought up today, such as the starting question, what is peace?
Yeah.
You know, so that's one of the things that I'm going to go away with. And I just want to say thank you to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And you might take this away and you might not, and either way is fine. But this combination of reflection and action, because it's neither one nor the other, it's the two together. And I've referred to it as reflection.
Reflection. Oh, that's a nice one. Okay, I'm going to cite you. Here we go. Okay.
Jenny.
So it's praxis, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, all kinds of things are swirling in my head. I think it kind of boils down to deepening my passion for helping to grow kindness in the world, genuine, deep kindness in the world. Kindness is deeply from the heart and not for your own personal benefit. And the ways that can ripple out and have such a positive impact. And one way is in peace, you know, world peace, peace within our communities, peace within our families, and looking at, I'm in the US, and how can I use this passion and deepen it for helping to open dialogue, conversations with each other, and open up, open hearts and minds to learning and growing and finding common ground rather than all that's dividing us. So taking away is that deepening of, you know, kindness and peace and how they come together and how I can amp up my personal ripple effect in my communities and going out beyond that.
And Jenny's too modest to mention that we're both involved in something, a One Voice for Kindness campaign, which is to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the World Kindness Movement. And that starts on the anniversary date, which happens to be the 20th of September, and then runs through until World Kindness Day on the 13th of November. So if any of you are interested to get involved or sign up to that, then please do. My action from today is a very simple one. And Roy, you'll remember our conversation quite some time ago when you said to me, there's no such thing as a coincidence. Well, directly before this call, I had a call with a lady in Canada who wants to talk about us doing some work together for the businesses in their local community. And she works in the nonviolent communication space and recommended that I read Marshall Rosenberg's book. And it's just come up in this conversation now. So there must be something that's telling me that I need to read it. So when I get off of this call, I will be ordering his book on Amazon. So thank you to all of you for the contribution. One of the things that I love about this is that it is kind of anti-expert, and what we draw on is everybody's lived experience. But we also have had the privilege of, I won't call them experts, but people with loads of experience and knowledge specifically in the area of peace, which helped us get into the topic itself. And I'm buzzing. It's been a thrill and a joy. So thank you all very much for coming along.
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.